Hello and welcome to the Right Perspective Podcast, Interview Edition. My name is Benjamin Davis, and I'm joined today by Ryan Swanson. Ryan, how you doing?
Doing fine. Good to be with you, Ben.
I'm glad you joined us. Very important topic about keeping our children free from porn. It's a terrible,
hmm
terrible thing going on in America right now. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are people listening to?
Sure. Well, I have a small family at this point with one 2-year-old and almost three, and then one that's about to be born next month, so the end of January. So we will be a family of four soon. But my wife is Stephanie, and together we have Satisfied Ministries that we've been running for about 2.5 years now. It's a purity ministry. And every opportunity we have, we're on the road, lots of times doing weekend purity seminars across the U.S. Just got back from Saskatchewan, been there twice actually this year, and just whatever opportunities we have, revival meetings with a purity focus, that kind of thing. So that's Satisfied Ministries, and then we also have a drone photography business that we operate here in Greenville, South Carolina, to support our ministry. So it's a fun balance.
Okay, nice. Nice. So it's mostly a speaking ministry. You go around and talk to people.
Correct. Yes, big part of that is an app that we've developed called the Cord. Some may be familiar with that, but it's a tool for accountability that we've developed specifically for this area of purity. And so quite a bit of our travels are helping churches get set up with that and counseling individuals and using that.
Okay, sounds good. I've heard of the Covenant Eyes, I think.
Yes, yes.
How's it
Yep.
differ? How does it work?
So I use Covenant Eyes as well. I think Covenant Eyes is a great tool. Covenant Eyes is a filter slash screen accountability tool and does very, very well with that. There's others also programs that are similar that work well, but the Cord is designed to be handle more the organic side of it. And so it's just checking in at the end of the day and with a simple video explaining to the group how you did, rating yourself. There's bars that'll come up, you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in thoughts, viewing, and self gratification. And that way it's just designed to take the subjectivity out of our accountability instead of just saying, hey, I did pretty well this week. But it's giving you a daily point of contact, which for those that have struggled in depth in this area of purity, that is very important part of this is that daily contact. So it really only takes 2 to 3 minutes at the end of the day to send that contact. It's just designed to be a tool for churches really to facilitate this area of discipleship on a daily basis.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. I hadn't heard of one like that before. I had heard of your app when our friend told me about you. So I went and
Yeah,
looked that up very, very briefly, but
sure.
that was like 2 weeks ago. So
Yes, yes, I
okay,
understand.
excellent. So talking about protecting kids, protecting
Mhm.
our kids as the father, as the parents, especially. So before we get into how to do that, tell us how big the problem is.
Well, it's huge. And let me just preface this as well by saying, as I did to you when you first approached me on this topic, is I understand that probably those listening have kids that are quite a bit older than mine, and that's probably why they clicked on this podcast. So I'm not speaking exactly from a point of experience other than just being a child myself, like all of us, and understanding that way. But I will be giving biblical principles as well as we have every church that I'm in, every group I'm in. I'm always bringing this up for discussion because I want to learn from other dads that have done things right, have done things wrong, and are willing to have that discussion. And so, just want to preface by saying a lot of what we'll talk about in this podcast. I just want to approach this humbly. This isn't necessarily speaking from my own wisdom, but this is authoritative because it's biblical principles we'll be discussing as well as conversations with dads that have been through this, and I think some that have really discovered some neat things. So back to your question, Ben, you said how big of an issue is this? And it's if we were to look at statistics just based on our church and how many men and women are struggling with this, just to see how broad the issue is at all, you would find that at this point they're saying 70% of the men in our churches are struggling to some degree with a pornography addiction, and 40% of our women, and actually the latest statistic is 75% of our men, uh, from a poll that was done at the end of last year. So 75% of men, 40% of women are struggling with this within our churches. And I've had some that say, well, surely that's just the left wing liberal churches that are struggling to that degree. Well, I was a bit tired of hearing that, and so we actually started doing our own polling in every church that we're in. We do an anonymous poll, and I'm telling you, brother, it's no different in our churches. Sadly, I wish it was. It's not. I think it's a problem across humanity that hardly has any bounds. And so it is very, very broad. Statistically, they say the earliest a child is exposed to it, the average age someone is exposed to hardcore pornography is 12 years old, and as some say, as early as 8. So, as with any addiction, the earlier you're exposed to it, experience it, it's doing something really, really deep in their hearts. And that is defining the severity of this issue for years to come.
Wow. So that's exposure to the hard stuff. And I mean,
Correct.
depends on how you define things, but I would define most people are exposed anytime they go to the beach or
Yes.
see a
Yes.
beach scene on the TV or something. But that's the hard stuff. Wow. 12
Exactly.
years old.
Yeah.
That's insane. It's gotta do terrible stuff to that growing chemistry in your brain.
Yeah, and I think many times it just begins out of curiosity at that point, Ben. And it's almost not even fair to a young person to have to wrestle and deal with what they're seeing at that age. But as with myself, I was exposed for the first time at 12 years old, just trying to help out a family in the church, clean out their garage. And a guy had a whole stack of magazines. And at that point, I had great parents, pastors home, but I had parents that really wanted to help. I could have gone to them and gotten help, but chose not to. And what began in curiosity just very, very quickly developed into an addiction at a young age at that point.
Do we I know in the Christian circles, we're very much on the protection, and that often goes into just don't tell them anything about it at all, you know? That attitude of just totally put them under a rock and they'll be safe.
Hmm.
Does that play into the curiosity, do you think?
Yes, yes, that is an excellent point you bring up, Ben. And it's really, I think the key word is innocence, because we really want to guard innocence in our children. And I think that's the number one reason that we don't talk about it. And that's not just as parents, that's also in our churches. We don't want to address it from the pulpit because we want to guard innocence. And there's a good point to that, because there's an appropriate audience and there's a right age, but that age is way earlier than you think it is. Just remember that. It's much earlier. And here's the reason why, is because you can sit back and say, okay, well, I'll talk to my talk to my kids about this when they're 18, let's say, and that'll be the point in which they understand the best. So I'll talk to them and help them when they're 18 years old. Well, I'll give you another stat. Statistics, again, this is from a poll done at the end of last year. 93% of boys and 63% of girls reported viewing internet pornography before the age of 18. So that's getting close to 100%. And we can say, well, that's not my kids. I really try to protect them. Well, it's the same devil that's after your kids. I can assure you that. And if we are not on top of this and intentionally looking for ways to help our kids in this area, you can be sure that the devil is intentionally going to be after your kids. If you're not the one to educate them, somebody else is going to step up to the plate. And I'm not talking about giving the whole birds and the bees at a young age. I just mean if you're not there to walk them through this on a regular basis, then it's going to be very, very dangerous for your kids. And I think a key passage for this is Proverbs chapter 7, because Solomon is, of course, in a discussion about the strange woman. He's really warning his sons at this point. And he describes in verse 6 of Proverbs 7, he says, "For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and behold, among the simple ones I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding." Oh, it's very interesting how he points that, because, of course, the passage goes on to describe how this young person was completely taken by the strange woman and caught there in immorality. But the only real reason that Solomon gives that this happened is that he was simple and void of understanding. Now, generally, we think a simple, well, that's a good thing. That's a positive thing if our kids are simple in this area. In fact, we may think of Paul's words in Romans 16, verse 19, I would have you wise unto that which is good and simple concerning evil. And so I struggled with this at first because what is it? Are we supposed to be simple concerning evil? Or are we, and looking at Proverbs, seems like that's a negative thing. But obviously, these are two different words in the original languages because one is Hebrew and one is Greek in the different testaments. And doing a simple, I don't want to belabor this, but a simple study shows that this is actually referring to two completely different things. The word here that Solomon uses is a lack of wisdom. So when he's saying this young person was simple, it means that they have a lack of wisdom or discernment. But when Paul uses the word that's translated simple, that word means intentionally pure or untangled by evil. So you have these two different concepts. And if our children are going to be intentionally and deliberately pure, which is what Paul is saying by being simple concerning evil, being untangled, then it's going to take some work on our part, not just sitting back and hoping for the best or even praying for the best. There's things that's a huge part of it, but there's things that we actively need to be involved in and doing to help in this issue as our young people if we're going to set them up for success when the strange woman comes, because she is going to come. And we read later in that passage, verse 15, she says, therefore came I forth to meet thee diligently to seek thy face. She's being diligent. The devil's being diligent to get to your kids. How diligent are we going to be and ensuring that they're prepared for that moment?
It's good. And a lot of that, I think, comes a lot of learning, that kind of thing, for especially younger kids, comes from repetition, from different scenarios,
Sure.
learning to discern what's good, what's bad, how do we deal with this. But how do we do that, if you agree? How do you
Mhm.
do that on this topic? You don't want to go showing them the dark recesses of the internet and say, avoid this, avoid this. So, how do we do that with kids?
That's a great question, Ben, and I'm not sure I have the answer for that because I that's something I've wondered as well is how to explain it in a way, how to prepare your kids in a way that is is not enlightening. I mean, I just think that's something that God is going to give you specific wisdom for your kids at the right way and in the right time to approach that and how specifically. So in all the principles we discuss, a lot of things do come back to the wisdom God's going to give you as a parent for your kids. He didn't make me parent to your kids. You are the dad for your own kids for a reason. And I think he expects every dad to wrestle through and get wisdom in that area. But speaking a little bit more clearly to your point, as far as repetition, I think one of the greatest keys is to be the first one to speak to this speak wisdom into your child's heart at a young age when they're first enlightened in this area. One of the questions I get all the time is how do we get to them at that point of enlightenment before the world steps in or before they go off on their own flesh and already have 2 years of a pornography addiction before we even find out about it as a parent. And again, I can't speak from personal experience here other than my own as a teenager, but let me just tell you, based on the discussions I've had with parents across the country here and what I like and what I've heard, what I think is a good approach here. And there's actually a principle that I've gained from our mutual friend Charlie that he helped me with that I thought was very good. And he just has young kids as well, but something he helped me with, and that is this: sexuality is something that is God given. So we can treat this like any other addiction and just say, no, 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 always say no. And this is terrible and wicked and disgusting and all this. If we were talking about drugs or alcohol or whatever, we could do that because those aren't God given desires. But this is a God given desire. And there's a lot of different ramifications because of that that we don't need to get into. But one of which is that it's not intrinsically evil. And so it's actually a helpful thing because at a young age, and this is what I plan to do with my son when he's, I don't know, 6 or 7, something like that. And at that point, they think girls are disgusting and cooties and they don't want anything to do with them, right? That's that innocence. And so I don't need to start trying to convince him of anything otherwise. But what I want to do is start regularly talking to him and saying, Parker, right now I know that there's really no desire to be with girls and you'd much rather hang out with your dudes and all that. And that's great. But Parker, remember, someday that's going to change. And you're all of a sudden going to want to be with girls. You're going to think they're pretty and cute. And of course, he's going to say, no, daddy, no. But I want to prepare him for that and say, so Parker, someday that's going to change inside of you. And Parker, that's not a bad thing. That's God growing you up. That's part of becoming a man. And that's going to be really exciting. And it's going to mean that daddy wants to be a part of that next stage in your life. That's a big deal. That's you growing up, being a man. And so the first thing I want you to do, Parker, is when you start noticing that change and you wanting to be with girls and that attraction and whatever, you come and tell daddy, and then daddy will help you know what to do next. And I don't think that's disingenuous to play that up as an exciting thing, even though I might be a little bit more daunted by that time than he because I know the ramifications of it. But I don't think it's disingenuous because that is an exciting thing. That's a part of growing up. And I want to be the first one there to help him with those next steps when that happens. And I think if we can do that, Ben, and we're there to help shape those next moments, that's going to do so much in helping set them up for victory in this area.
I love that. I love that preemption
Yeah.
and saying the exciting part. Hopefully that kind of gets past the, oh, I'm closing my ears because daddy is saying something super silly about me liking girls. That's insane.
Yeah,
I'm not
sure.
even going to listen. So hopefully that gets past that a little bit. I like that.
Right. Right.
I wanted to share one of the things my parents did growing
Yeah.
up is we had a lot of the protection. We didn't watch just anything. They screened our movies, but they also we watched a lot of movies and TV shows. But we there was a lot of covering. This woman is not dressed appropriately. We cover that. We don't look at that. And as we got older, it was we trust you to look away, but
Hmm.
that was stated as an expectation. And that was the repetition needed on the very low level stuff. Uh, just a neckline that was out of line a little bit, you know.
Hmm.
So anything beyond that was obvious to us, oh, that no, that is not okay. You look
Right.
away. So
Right.
I think I never found magazines like that, like you did
Hmm.
at the friend's house. But if I had, I think they would have set me up well to this is terrible. I don't look at that. You know.
Right.
Maybe I would have been found at a time of weakness, but I at least knew
That's
that that
great.
was bad. So
Yes.
I think that was
Yes.
really good what they did.
That's good. I'll mention one more thing to that point of repetition, Ben. And I think that's very good what your parents did in training you to kind of what some has turned just bouncing the eyes, just becomes a habit just to look right away. But another very helpful thing, because of course, there still could be something going on in secret behind the parents' back. So to facilitate that regular communication, I've talked to one dad that I had actually counseled both of his sons, and neither of them seemed to ever have struggled with pornography at all, which is very, very rare in this day. So I set up a meeting with the dad, who's a pastor, and said, "I want to know what you're doing with your sons because this is incredible. This is great." He reaches into his desk drawer and he pulls out a sheet of paper that's kind of a survey report that he goes through once a week with his sons. So on a Saturday, they sit down, and I don't know what age he started this, if it was like preteen or teenager, I'm not sure, but the questions on this were incredible, and he had just come up with himself. But the ones that I remember were things like, "What was the hardest temptation that you faced this week?" Now, the reason that's such a good question is it's not just saying, what was your worst failure this week? There's a difference, and they should communicate that. But see, what this is doing, Ben, is allowing for communication on the purity topic that's not just confession of sin. And so he allows his sons to say, okay, yeah, this was the hardest temptation, even if they didn't fall to it. And another one of the questions, what was your greatest moment of victory this week? And so they can explain to their dad, I turned away from this. This was a big temptation, but I had great victory there. And I think encouraging that kind of regular conversation, it makes a safe place where they know I can go to dad and talk about this, and we're going to talk about this. So it's also a point of accountability, but it's just facilitating that safe place to talk about these things, whether it was a point of victory or defeat. We know we're going to be able to talk to dad about that.
I love that. And all week that's like, oh, if I turn away from this, I get to tell dad
Right,
that there was
right,
victory. But if I don't, I got to tell
yeah,
him. Yeah.
exactly.
And we kind of had that with our wives. It's like, if I fail,
Hmm.
I'm going to have to tell my wife that I failed. And that's very helpful, at least to me.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Uh, so let's get into the tech side a little bit. I don't know if you talk to guys a lot about that. You know, I probably have a very simplistic, kind of a normal idea. Like, okay, we're gonna put the computer in the living room if when the kids start having a computer for their school. Oh, they're not gonna have. We're gonna keep them from smartphones as long as possible, maybe until they're 18 or 16 or something. And there's gonna be filters on the Wi-Fi and all this stuff.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Is that going too far into the keeping them from even being able to practice avoiding temptation, or do you
No,
think
I
that's
I
too
think
little?
no, no, no. I think you as a parent, you make every precaution that you can to set them up in that way. Essentially, what you're asking is can you shelter somebody too much in which they're going to be unprepared when they hit the world? I don't think so. I think what is damaging is if we don't talk about why, or we don't, if our it's more like this. I think if your hope and your trust is in the precautions you're setting up for their victory, that's the problem. So if you think, as many dads have, well, I've got the computer in the living room, got everything locked down, I don't give them smartphones and all this. So there's no way that any of my kids are struggling. And so then they don't talk to their kids about it. They don't have these weekly accountability meetings. They don't, whatever. And maybe they miss other precautions because they're so convinced that whatever they've done is enough. And that in and of itself, not the actions you're taking are great, but if a dad is relying on those things, then that's really a point of arrogance that could be very, very damaging to to children in that way. And that's clearly not the case for you because you're also talking about other ways to deal with this. But many dads, I had one dad call me and he said, I've really tried, I've tried everything. He was at his wit's end, like he's taken the door off his son's room, so there's no isolation there. Like I respect the lengths he's gone through, but the point is, there's always going to be a way. There's always a way. I was at a Home Depot one time with my dad when I was a teenager. We had a storage unit and we were into Home Depot trying to buy a lock for this outdoor storage unit. And my dad said to the sales associate there, he said, I need you to give me a lock that will keep people from breaking into my storage unit. And the guy, without skipping a beat, he said, I'm sorry, we don't sell anything like that here. And I'm, as a teenager, I'm looking at a whole wall full of these locks. I'm like, what do you mean you don't sell those here? The guy said this. He said, locks are to keep the innocent people out. If somebody wants to break in, they're going to do it. That's a great, great point right there. But that doesn't mean, as I've heard also many people say, well, true victory is to have all your devices completely open and to have full access and then to say no to it. No, that's true stupidity right there, my brother. That's making no provision for the flesh is still a biblical principle, as much as it always was. And but it's not everything. So maybe this is going into it too much, but just to explain in brief, I really think there's three different areas of this battle that we have to be willing to fight ourselves and to set our children up. We need to be addressing the battle in all three of these areas. The first off is desire, and that would be like walk in the spirit and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's huge. That's a promise. So the number one thing we can do is pointing our children to Christ. And are you nurturing a relationship in them between Christ, not just them and you? That's great. And for a while, when they're really young, in some ways are the oracles of God to them. But at a point, and the goal of us as parents should be to point them to Christ. They should be hearing from God themselves. when they see something inappropriate, they should eventually be looking away because it's going to hurt the Holy Spirit inside of them, not just because daddy's going to be upset. So that's really important. That they need to focus on the desire, and I think in many cases in our conservative homes, this is usually what we focus on the most. Secondly, though, would be the area of availability, and that's what you're talking about when it comes to tech, locking things down, using covenant eyes, putting things in open areas, whatever the case, using filters, great things. That's in that category of availability. Make no provision for the flesh to fill the lust thereof. There's other verses like, walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Okay. Clearly, that's a biblical area to deal with. But then, thirdly, so desire, availability, and then isolation. If somebody has the desire to look at something wicked, they're sitting at a computer with complete access, but then mom walks over and looks over their shoulder. Well, they're not tempted at all, right? Because there's no isolation. So isolation is just as required. And so if we're going to fight this, we need to fight it in all three of these categories. And the reason that I stress that, and that's so important, Ben, is because generally we choose one of those categories. And through what sometimes is arrogance, maybe ignorance, but sometimes arrogance, will say, well, kid, if you just read your Bible and pray every day, you'll never struggle with this. Now, reading your Bible and praying is an excellent step in furthering your relationship with Christ in that desire category, right? But that's only 1/3 of the issue. And if we say that that's everything, we're ignoring 2/3 of Scripture on the issue. We've got to present the whole counsel of God. So the best way, and if someone's dealing with teenage children, you say, well, I've already passed that point where their minds are open to this. What do I do? Sit down, take a piece of paper, put out 3/3, write desire, availability, and isolation, and walk through the steps that you have taken or still need to take to lock things down and to address the purity battle in those areas. Are you having a walk with Christ? What can we do to give you more time in the morning? Are your devices locked down in the availability category? What can do we do to make sure things aren't as accessible? And then thirdly, what can we do to set up a point of accountability? Maybe that's the court app. Maybe that's a time you're connecting with them as a father. But what can we do to decrease that isolation? And when we are willing to take the entire counsel of God, Ben, and address in all three of those areas, that's been the number one helpful thing our ministry has seen in helping folks break free in this area. Is not just addressing one area at a time and looking for that quick fix, but let's look at the whole issue and declare war on our lust and address it on all three battlefronts.
I love that. Desire, availability, and isolation.
You got it.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's a battle plan. I love it.
Yeah.
All
Yep.
right. So here's a good spot. You mentioned the desire part. I'm going to do a little plug. Just recently, I wrote a family worship guide. So to help fathers, they don't know what to do in leading their family spiritually. So it has every day of the month. What what Bible do you read to chapter do you read to your kids? Here's catechism questions for the day. Here's hymns to sing with them. And my kids are about your kids' age, so we don't do the catechism part yet because they can't
Sure.
read. But we try
Yeah.
to read some proverbs or psalms to them after dinner, and then sing a couple hymns. And they love the hymns. They love the singing. We'll do two hymns, and they'll be like, "More singing." Anyway, that's available on Amazon.
That's great. Yeah.
Family worship, leader's guide, and follower guide. So anyway, I think
That's great.
we we lost that over the last 80, 100 years. You know, family worship used to be very, very encouraged by the church leaders, and it just really isn't anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Outsourced it all to, you know, children's church and such like. But that's not daily. That's not with your
Sure.
parents.
That's true. Hmm.
Anyway,
That's great. I'm
done
gonna
with
look
the
that up.
plug. Sounds good. So you already I think you already mostly answered my last question of where most people fail. It sounds like most people, if they're tuned into this topic at all, they're thinking about one, maybe two of those three thrusts. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think Most of the time we fail because of arrogance, and sometimes arrogance just comes across as optimism. Normally, someone that's struggling in this area either has a pessimistic or an optimistic viewpoint on it. If they're pessimistic, then they're thinking, man, I've failed. I'm never going to get victory, and this is just terrible. I'm just going to throw in the towel and give up. In our Christian circles, that's actually a minority. Generally, what I see is guys that say, like, man, I've had 2 days of victory and I've read my Bible. I think I've kicked this thing for life. And in that case, the verse that says, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall, that's where that comes into play right there. So just getting at a point of consistency, understanding that to some degree, this is a battle we'll be fighting our entire lives. That doesn't mean that we need to be discouraged because this is an addiction I'm going to have my whole life or it's never going to get easier. That's not the case. In fact, if we were to look at Ephesians chapter 6, there's a really helpful verse for that where it says, wherefore take unto the whole armor of God that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, or to stand in the evil day. But then it says, and having done all to stand. So it says stand against first, but then it says the reason we're doing this is that someday we'll be able to say, and having done all. That's standing, picture that like standing on a hill, this soldier there, still clad in his armor, but looking around and saying, where'd the enemy go? Like, that thing that used to be a threat to me is no longer a threat. That man, I really would have tripped up there, but that's not a struggle anymore. That's awesome. God's done something here. But notice the verse doesn't say, and having done all to sit, right? We're not taking the armor off. We're not letting our guard down. That's not the idea. So we have to stay in the battle and keep our minds focused and always be checking in those three areas. Where are my weak points? Because that's where the devil's going to get us. But be encouraged because victory is promised. There's coming a day where we can say, and having done all, we're standing.
Until we enter the land of rest. That's good.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
good. Well, I said that was last question, but I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about how tech changes and AI. And let me know what you think, but I get the feeling that tech has been changing so rapidly that part of the problem with my parents' generation, one of the struggles they ran into was they just didn't have any idea how accessible and how prolific
Yes.
porn was on the internet. So, a little bit of guardrails and then, have fun. And if we're not careful, we think of ourselves as a very techie generation, but things are only speeding up. AI porn is, if it's not already a big thing, it's going to be, I'm pretty sure, and we just won't know. We can't
Hmm.
keep up with all the technological advancements. What are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. I think a key verse that shows that difference is Proverbs chapter 5. I believe it's verse number 8. It says, speaking of the strange woman, Solomon says, remove thy way far from her and come not nigh the door of her house. Now, it's what's interesting and almost comical to me is in that day, the solution was don't go to her house, right? So if you wanted to fight pornography, just stay on your side of town. And there's some great principles we can derive from that. But my point is, it's not a new battle what we're facing today, Ben, but it's a different battle than ever before. Just the idea of the sheer prevalence of this demands that we address and fight this in whether it's a different way or perhaps a greater intensity than we have ever needed to. You bring up a great point in dealing with our parents or referencing our parents that meant well, but many times they didn't understand this. You see, they grew up in the 60s and 70s. Now, the 60s and 70s, that was an evil decade. There were some wicked things going on in the 70s. But if you grew up in a Christian home, I don't think you would have known it because you could you could effectively shelter somebody in your home and just be sure that the things aren't entering in. As long as we did that, we kept them safe. Nowadays, that's not the case. It's looking for them. And at some point, it's going to find them. No amount of sheltering is going to keep your children safe. So, Ben, I like to think of our generation as a sacrificial generation. We're many times struggled in this way because we had very well meaning parents that did everything they knew how. But the fact is, they didn't understand the issue and they couldn't have. They couldn't have understood how prevalent this was. And so we are maybe the sacrificial generation because of that. But I'm telling you what, if I let my son go through the same thing, and I don't set him up in ways that I've learned from now being through it. Again, no fault to my parents at all. They loved me, did everything they could. But man, fool me twice, that's my mistake right there, right? We understand the issue. And so maybe we're the sacrificial generation that needs to now make decisions of intentionality to say, okay, it got me, but no way am I going to allow my son to go through that same thing.
Yeah, that's good. My my fear, I guess, is that when I'm 50, I'm gonna still think I understand technology when I won't understand the technology that my kids are dealing with. I'm pretty sure, unless things really slow down or something, EMP, you know. uh, but I fear that you keep saying arrogance. I fear that arrogance of thinking my parents didn't understand the technology I dealt with, but I understand the technology my kids are dealing with. And that that availability part is I'll put the filter on the Wi-Fi and my kids will be good as far as the availability is concerned. I doubt it. I really doubt it.
Sure.
And keeping them out of isolation. I think that makes those two much more important because we can't really we can do a lot, but we can't really keep up with the availability part. You went over to your friend's house. We
Right.
can't just always keep we
Right.
can't keep them totally isolated from the
Yes, I
people in the
think, Ben,
community.
it's both what you said about the teaching part of it, but it's also listening. So what you're essentially saying is that our kids are going to learn technology faster, which of course is the case. And so what if in those weekly or monthly or whatever times, and I think weekly is better, you're sitting down with your kids, you say, what was the hardest temptation you faced? Well, they're going to bring up things that maybe I didn't even realize existed. And okay, now we can deal with that. But if through arrogance, there's that word again, if I'm only teaching and I'm not willing to learn, now I can't help them. I can I am I can no longer help them if I'm not willing to allow my counsel to be relevant to the temptations that they are facing.
That's good. That's good. You won't hear about how your kid went over to Johnny's house and tried his new stick-on Neuralink and saw all
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Boy, boy, yeah, no kidding.
Well, Ryan, this was a really good conversation. Where can people hear more about you, hear more about your ministry?
Well, you can look us up on satisfied.org. That's our ministry website. There's a link there to both our podcast, the Satisfied Podcast. You can find that, as well as to the Cord. The Cord.app is the website for that. But there's links to that all from our website at satisfied.org. You can also email me at ryan@satisfied.org.
Excellent. And is the Cord app on Google Play and
It is.
Apple Store, all
Yes,
that?
sir.
Okay.
Yep, it's on all the stores. You'll find it there.
Excellent. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. Very important topic. I think this will be a great blessing to the few people that listen to it. I think it'll be a great blessing. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you, Ben, for having me.
You have a great day.